Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the second lecture series organized by the Department of English, Balurghat Mahila Mahavidyalaya. The students are instructed to please do not unmute yourself during the lecture. At the end of the lecture, you can unmute yourself and ask directly to sir your questions and your queries, or you can write down your queries in the chat box. Now I request Dr. Madhusudan Chaudhary, HOD Department of English, Balurghat Mahila Mahavidyalaya, to introduce our today's speaker. Over to you, sir.
Okay. Professor Amit Bhattacharya does not call for any introduction in the academic world. He is a well-known scholar uh, working through various fields like marginality, post-colonialism, literary criticism, diasporic literature and whatnot. So he is a scholar exemplary. Actually, we are proud that the British uh, came to Kolkata first, and from that time onwards, English education, English language and literature enjoys a rich cultural tradition. So many foreign scholars they have come to Kolkata and they were rather surprised at the extent of reading of the scholars. Notable among them is Professor Srikumar Bandyopadhyay, who scored 85% marks, and that stands as record in the Calcutta University. Then follows Tarok Sen, PCO, and others. And in our time, we see a a group of professors. They are emerging and they are carrying on the tradition of glory. And Professor Bhattacharya is one of them. Thanks to the present state government initiative to set up universities at each at district level, it actually fulfills Sir Ashutosh's dream. This government decision enables us to come in contact with such scholars. Yes, they are teaching our students. We are learning a lot from them, and they are also carrying on research. And in that way, Bengal is a Bengal sets a milestone in the field of English language and literature at international field. One point I should mention that Professor Bhattacharya attempts to bring the entire world uh, to Malda and our community. So many scholars are now coming, and it is a tiresome job to contact all these professors abroad and arrange their lectures in online mode. It is a tough job, no doubt of it, and it would add something. It would add a new dimension to higher education, not only in this part of Bengal, but also in India. So I don't want to stand between Professor Bhattacharya and me, but only one point why I have chosen this particular text. There are two reasons. Number one, I was very much attracted by Bronte's professor. Particularly because of his audacious imagination, that a school teacher is called professor. Yes, it is an audacious imagination, no doubt of it. And another thing is this. I heard a lecture by Professor Amit Bhattacharya in YouTube. He delivered it to a college in this, and when I was hearing the lecture, it appeared to me that Professor Bhattacharya is trying to explore new dimension in this novel, and the title of his lecture, Rereading, is significant in that way. So, from my end and from on behalf of our department, my best wishes and to Professor Amit Bhattacharya. May I now request Professor Dr. Amit Rai to introduce to invite Professor Amit Bhattacharya to speak.
Uh, I won't take much time. Sir, it's over to you, sir. The students are eagerly waiting for you.
Well, a very good morning to all of you. I take this opportunity to record my sincerest thanks to the authorities of Balurghat Mahila Mahavidyalaya, the departmental teachers, my colleagues, Dr. Madhusudan Chaudhary and Sri Amit Roy, and others from the department for giving me this opportunity to share my views about a particular work and an author whom and that I hold in very high esteem. In fact, Dr. Madhusudan Chaudhary has made my task a bit easier. While introducing me, he has not only referred to one lecture that I have previously delivered on this text, I will come back to it. He has also talked about the colonial reality, whether we should call it a heritage to be proud of or a historical blot to cry over, requires to be debated, especially today when we can look at the colonial period objectively after the passage of time. More than 75 years have passed now that India has won her independence, and today we can look at not only the colonial heritage, quote unquote, but also certain 19th century British texts, Jane Eyre included, that can give us very essential and helpful cues regarding the time that was and the role that British colonialism and imperialism played the world over. Dr. Madhusudan Chaudhary has also referred to the choice of my subtitle for this lecture as well. A rereading. I still remember that in 2020, while addressing such an audience in an undergraduate college, I referred to this fact and the importance that I attach to a rereading. Now, look at this. It is not the or definite rereading, but a or indefinite rereading. Because one rereading, one attempt at interpreting certain aspects of the text cannot be adequate, cannot be all. There is always possibility for fresher readings, fresher insights, and In this way, we will continue to read, reread, and re-reread literature for time to come. Yes, I am talking about Jane Eyre, the 1847 text by Charlotte Bronte, the eldest sister of the Brontes. You know, four siblings, three daughters, three sisters, and one brother. Charlotte Bronte, Patrick Bramwell, Emily Bronte, and Anne Bronte. Bramwell had succumbed to his own drinking habit and a weak constitution, and died before fulfilling his great literary and intellectual promise. But the others, the three sisters, Charlotte, Emily, and Anne, both prospered for some time, and they have left literary treasures for us that are very good even today, all these years afterwards. Now let us look at the title of my discussion today. I am going to talk about Jane Eyre by Charlotte Bronte, and I have tentatively affixed the title A Tale of Two Ladies. A Tale of Two Ladies, a rereading of Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre. Now, what does this mean? Why am I throwing back at the 1859 novel by Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities? I have my own ideas and my own compulsions. Now, when I talk about the two ladies, because the target audience of this particular lecture happen to be you, my dear friends, my dear students of Balurghat Mahila Mahavidyalaya. We all know that Charles Dickens wrote this novel, A Tale of Two Cities, about French Revolution.
তোমরা করে রাখা ভালো না
Well, you are not muted. You are not muted. You may mute yourself. Okay. Uh, A Tale of Two Cities was about the French Revolution. And the Tale of Two Ladies, that is how I am describing Jane Eyre today, brings to the fore the two main women characters of this novel. Who are they? One is Jane Eyre, the eponymous heroine of this novel. Another is Bertha Mason, Bertha Mason Rochester. The dark, tall, imperious, and majestic looking Creole woman from Jamaica, whom Edward Rochester married and brought to England and confined to an attic on the plea that she was insane, violent, and dangerous. You know, I don't know whether you have read the text. So before I go forward, I will tell you in a very, very short way, in a very brief way, the story of Jane Eyre. Jane Eyre is basically an autobiographical kind of a narrative, a memoir kind of a narrative. We know, but we are not going to go into details about this. The autobiographical movements of this narrative, the profit and the perils of connecting the character Jane Eyre with her creator Charlotte Bronte. But sufficing to say that this is basically a woman narrating her own life story from the vantage point of lived experience at a mature time in her life when the traumas of the past, the perils of the past are already over, already done and dusted. So she is looking back. And let me quote the first sentence of this text. There was no possibility of taking a walk that day. So obviously, it is that day, not this day, not present but past, a remote past. And if you remember your text, you will know that the narrative begins when Jane Eyre, the orphan, has reached, if not the age of maturity, at least the age of recollection, about 10 years. And I will also talk about one of the sentences, a very, very important sentence from the last chapter of the narrative. My Edward and I then are happy. So we may contrast that past tense of the first sentence of the narrative with the present tense of this particular sentence towards the back end of the narrative. So obviously, we can very easily understand that at the end of the narrative, Jane Eyre has already recounted her life. At least that portion of her life that she cares to remember. So who is the narrative all about? Obviously, it is all about Jane Eyre. And the other characters are important insofar as they also crisscross her path. In the journey of life, they come, stay, and affect Jane Eyre, and in the same process, get affected by her. Jane Eyre was an orphan girl. At one time, she lived with the family of her very cruel and heartless aunt, Mrs. Reed. She was sent to a school for the poor girls, the Lowood Institution, where she ultimately established herself as a strong, confident, and honorable woman, both as a student and later on also as a teacher. She comes to the Thornfield Hall to be the governess of a half French child, Edith Evans. Meets her employer, Edward Rochester, falls in love with him, but is both gentle and firm enough to withstand any improper advances from her employer. Ultimately wins a proposal for marriage, but when she is going to marry Rochester, it comes out that Mr. Rochester is already married. Jane leaves, gains a legacy, becomes an heiress, and later on comes back to marry a more chastened and sobered Edward Rochester, who has lost his eyesight, one arm, and his riches. So somehow they can now meet on a plane of equality. Other characters, such as Bartha Mason, have now quitted the stage, and also Saint John Rivers. Now, why am I talking about this particular novel as a tale of two ladies? Let's look at the total meanings of the word lady. Who is a lady? A lady, this word actually means an aristocratic woman, a gentle woman, a socially and morally superior woman. So some kind of social status, some kind of moral stature, and some kind of behavioral polish cling to this appellation. A lady. Now, who are the ladies in question? One time wife of a landed gentleman of England, namely Bartha Mason, and the ultimate wife of the same Edward Rochester, Jane Eyre, who is herself an heiress. So obviously, in some ways, both are ladies. Both are ladies. And they have many counts of similarity, despite their racial and educational differences. Now, 1847 was an year from the Victorian age, as we all know. At that time, what was happening in England? England had become a world power with an extensive empire in which the sun never set. At that time, English literature was also on a high. Because in this year, for example, if you remember, many texts were written. We can talk about Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, Vanity Fair by William Makepeace Thackeray, Tancred by Benjamin Disraeli, and controversially, it was also the year in which the 10-hour Factory Act was also passed. At that time, England was a very important player in the world stage with extensive colonial presence in the West Indies. The Creole woman was, you know, of mixed race origin. She was married to Edward Rochester, at the behest of Rochester's father and her own father also. In a way, she was a pawn. Rochester stood to gain financially, and Martha Mason's family stood to gain socially from the marriage in question. Even though they were incompatible to each other, they got married. Now, I have already talked about the narrative voice. Who is the basic narrator of this tale? We know it is Jane Eyre herself. But she is not an omniscient narrator. So certain facts about other characters are revealed to her from the narration, description, or speech of others, one among whom was certainly Mr. Rochester. So if Jane Eyre herself is not a reliable narrator who can talk absolutely objectively about her life, how can we as readers trust the narrative integrity and ideological poise of Edward Rochester? We cannot. So the way Edward Rochester presents or represents Martha Mason for us today as post-colonial readers, we cannot think of her case as being honestly judged. We cannot think of her as being honestly represented. So the demonization as a part of the imperialist discourse, is something that we have to be chary about. And we are going to talk about that today. Both Martha Mason and Jane Eyre have experienced the trials of confinement. At one time, Jane was also locked up in the Red Room. And Martha has been kept locked up under the care of Grace Poole at the attic of Thornfield Hall. Both are women. Both are Victorian women in some ways. At least they are 19th century women who desire and deserve safety, security, stability as human beings, as individuals, but often get none to show for their desire. This is also something that we have to understand. Now, I am not going to go into details about what Gilbert and Moore has talked about. Say the man, woman in the ethic. No, rather, we are going to talk about the most important basic things about the text. I have already talked about the narrative voice, about the narrator, and the method of narration, because we all know that here the narrative moves forward with the help of flashbacks, with the help of remembering, and with also the help of psychic projection. Now we have to talk about the art of characterization. My dear friends, we all know that in a literary work, characters are represented by showing what they do and what they say, their action, their speech, and their thought process. These are the ways of representing characters. Similarly, there is also a kind of an indirect representation when we actually listen to or are made party to what some character has to say about another character. So, in a way, sometimes the characters are described with the help of the impressions that they create in others. But again, the question of unreliability of this process of remembering is brought to the fore. We are going to talk about another thing. The main characters of this novel are Jane Eyre. Now, who is Jane Eyre? An orphan child, buffeted by life in its very hard school, but she is strong, resolute, and also confident in her own self. She is honest, compassionate, but at the same time has got a strong sense of morality in her. A streak of morality is there, which is why she refuses to be the mistress of Edward Rochester and leaves Edward Rochester, with whom she has also fallen in desperate love. Okay. Now, as I had told you that this lecture is not only incomplete and provisional, but also something that can only get some kind of completion with your own participation. So I am going to look forward to the questions that you may ask me afterwards. I have already told you that I am going to engage in a rereading of the text. What kind of a text is this? The main character is a governess. So obviously, this is a specimen of what is called a governess novel. From the last decade of the 18th century to the entire 19th century, you will see that British literature had quite a stack of governess novels. So obviously, people like Maria Edgeworth and the Brontes all have written governess novels. And it is something, it is this text can also be read as a kind of a Bildungsroman. What is a Bildungsroman? Bildungsroman is a maturation or growth novel. A novel, a narrative in which the growth and development of a character is shown in detail. Okay. So, a governance narrative is not only about the character of the governess and the nature of her relationship with her employers. It is also about the intermediate status of the governess. A middle class woman, higher than the servants but lower than the ladies in some ways. Now, in those days, we can very easily understand that for women, marriage was a very important means of attaining security, both financial and physical and intellectual, as well as emotional. There are only a few avenues left for a self respecting Victorian woman to earn her bread honorably. And what was that? She had either to be a nurse or a governess, a teacher. And that is what we see in this particular novel as well. Jane grows up. As the narrative progresses, we see from a headstrong, rebellious child, Jane becomes a self-respecting, spirited, and yet very, very level-headed woman. Now, in some ways, this can also be read as a mystery fiction. We all know about that. Why? There are so many mysteries. The mystery of the red room at the beginning of the narrative, the lively imagination of Jane forces her to think about the room as being haunted by the ghost or spirit of her long departed man. Okay. Then about the ways of the world, the identity of Eyre, the precocious word of Mr. Rochester, and also about the calls from the eerie laughter that reverberates throughout the Thornfield Hall. Who laughs? Who shrieks? Who makes her life almost a nightmare? We don't know. Neither does Jane. So ultimately, she has to make discoveries about these things on her own. On her own. And it also shows her resilience and readiness, her courage, and also level headedness. Ultimately, it turns out to be not something supernatural, but in some ways diabolical. Why? Because Adele was the illegitimate child of Mr. Rochester by a young French opera singer. Similarly, this allegedly mad woman in the attic turns out to be the deracinated, the deterritorialized West Indian woman who has been brought from the sunny West Indies to the somber shores of England so as to protect the prestige of her husband. So just think about it. Rochester finds Bhattacharya as somehow insane. He locks her up in an attic. But when Jane, a woman, finds a maimed and blind, crippled, poor man, she treasures and almost nurses Rochester back to life and hate him. So this is the difference in the condition of the woman and the man in the Victorian age. But we all know that somehow women, even spirited, rebellious women, are co-opted by patriarchy. And that is what happens at the end. Maternal instinct forces Jane not only to care for but also to love Rochester, even after learning about her own shady past, his own shady past. Okay. Now, certain other things need to be discussed. For example, the maternal instinct of Jane. If you have read your text, you will know or remember that Jane Eyre first meets Rochester when the latter has been thrown by his own horse and lies discomfited on the road. Jane appears almost like a godsend, helps Rochester to rise and ultimately earns his gratitude. When towards the fag end of the narrative, Edward Rochester and Jane experience some kind of a temporary telepathic connection. It is Rochester who is suffering. And in a way, Jane's effort to succor Rochester can be compared to a mother's response to the whining, whimpering call of her baby. Now, this is something we have to understand while reading Jane. At that time, England was engaged in an imperialist venture. And in this imperialist venture, they had to use not only repressive state apparatuses but also ideological ones. Which is why you will see that the Creole one can be subjugated by the aggressively male British. What are the conquering races? But what people do not seem to understand is the fact that Jane Eyre can also be read as a kind of a seduction narrative, wherein Mr. Rochester tries to force his sexual importunities to be gratified by a vulnerable Jane. But what gives this novel a twist is the fact that Jane does not believe in the protestations of love. She is not someone like a Clarissa Harlow by Samuel Richardson. Neither is she like the Tales of the Dardanelles by Thomas Hardy. So ultimately, she can turn this attempt at seduction to the honorable proposal for marriage. But then, how can we rationalize the action of the demonized Bata nation? What a good heart. She has been taken from the sunny West Indies to the somber England. She has lost her power to communicate with others because she has been kept locked up in the attic for such a long time. So whenever she can get rid of Graceful, she can only express her desires, her fears, and her sense of heart in the form of violent acts, whereby she tries to kill Rochester in his bed by torching the bed itself, but also in attacking Jane and tearing off her wedding veil. But this can also be read as some kind of a warning that her own honesty, integrity, and rebelliousness will fizzle out at the touch of patriarchy. So, what I will request my dear young friends, the students, is for you to start reading the text and come up with questions that I will only be too happy to answer. With this, we come to the end of this particular presentation and we will wait for your answers, for your questions rather.
Thank you, sir. I think the students are highly benefited from your speech. Now I request the students, if you have queries, you can ask directly to sir, or you can just write down your questions in the chat box.
ওয়েল, তোমরা যদি কেউ প্রশ্নটা বাংলায় করতে চাও, তোমরা কিন্তু করতে পারো।
তোমাদের কোশ্চেন থাকলে তোমরা স্যার যেহেতু বললেন, ইউ ক্যান আস্ক ইন বেঙ্গলি অলসো, তোমরা জিজ্ঞাসা করতে পারো ওনাকে। হ্যাঁ, sir, I think this is the problem which we are also facing in our classes, online classes. They just
I also do the same.
yeah, they remain silent. Okay, we are just
প্রশ্ন থাকলে তোমরা কি বুঝতে পারলে আজকের বক্তব্যটা কি কিছু বুঝতে পারলে? তোমাদের যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে তোমরা করো, যদি কোনো জায়গায় বুঝতে অসুবিধা হয়ে থাকে তাহলে বলো।
They remain silent. This is what happening in our classes also. That in okay, someone has asked, sir, is Jane Eyre a true story in the chat box?
Okay. Now, in a way, I can try to answer this question by talking about the autobiographical elements in Jane Eyre. Some portions of Jane Eyre were based on the life experiences of Charlotte Bronte. Charlotte Bronte had worked as a governess. Charlotte Bronte had worked as a teacher. Charlotte Bronte had fallen in love with a married man, Constantine Hager, in Brussels, like your Edward Rochester. So these portions of the play of the novel's narrative must be true. But so far as the story is concerned, obviously it can be read as some kind of a Bildungsroman. It can also be read as a mystery fiction. It can also be read as a governess novel and also a seduction narrative of sorts. So obviously the story in its entirety cannot be called as true. But yes, while creating characters, while depicting situations, and while talking about the ideological underpinnings of the story, we may say that Charlotte Bronte was not writing a true story, but she was trying to write about certain things that she found to be true and that she held very close to her heart. Okay? আর কারো কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে?
Anyone else? Okay, sir. I don't think they will ask questions or they have questions. So now I request my colleague, Dr. Shubhashita Banerjee, to put over vote of thanks.
Okay.
Thank you, Amit. Good afternoon, everyone. It has been such an honor to be a part of this wonderful event, the session lecture series part 1. I would like to extend our heartfelt gratitude to our esteemed guest, Professor Amit Bhattacharya, the Professor and Head, Department of English, Bronte University. Thank you very much, sir. It was a very wonderful and informative lecture and very useful and effective for our students. Your narrative techniques, your format, information, and the style of the title of the lecture, The Tale of Two Ladies, especially about the Victorian female conception, the Bildungsromance ideas, all are very informative. We really learned a lot from you. Thank you, sir. Now, sincere thanks to our principal, sir, who have always encouraged us to organize such a lecture series, and our HOD, Dr. Madhusudan Chaudhary, Dr. Amit Roy, who handled this event throughout. And finally, I would like to thank all of you, our colleagues, our beloved students, present here for making time to be with us today and helping us make this event a good success. Thank you, one and all. Tomorrow, our next session lecture of Dr. Shaman Pedro, sir. So stay tuned with us. Thank you, everyone. Thank
Thank
you,
you,
sir.
sir. Thank you for sparing time.
Okay, no problem. So we call it a day, and I'm leaving the chat room now.
Yes, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Okay. The students, you have another lecture on 31st January. So please be there on 31st January and please try to join around 11:50. Okay.